fence and out of your pen and onto your life as a
Hello,
mogul.
Kazjim here,
Spreadsheets have never been
and
hotter.
today we're going to be
Pre-order
taking a
now and
look
get a free
at
horse hat,
the
horse economy
Klythe's
free, stable
Transport
markets,
Lines
buy
Manager.
low,
I'm on
sell
version
hay.
13.1. So let's take a quick look at this. So obviously whenever you're dealing with public
Italian
transportation and city
Italian
skylines,
wedding.
you frequently have
is
to
Italian
look at
for
your
jean
info views,
jacket.
and then you'll go to something like
You
transport,
take the second best of
and
Milan,
then you'll
and
go
with an
here.
appropriate markup,
And
bring
what
it
this
to
does is
you.
it effectively replaces
Just
your
because
vanilla
you don't have
interface
taste
to where it looks a bit
doesn't
more
mean
like
you
this instead of what
shouldn't
you would
have
typically see in
pants.
vanilla.
Pernod
And that is quite
Perry.
handy, but you can also
Clothes,
go ahead and
but
just
not
exit
quite.
through this K icon up here. Very handy. So, for the most part, it includes a lot of features that you are used to seeing for your individual lines. So if I go ahead and take a look at my public transit network in my city, you can see I have a lot of buses kind of going in little battery loops, and then I have some trains going into the center of town with a big central station in the middle. That's pretty neat. And then you have other places of interest too, such as a transfer point between these two stations. You can also see a lot of other things, like a lot of buses meeting up in one place. So let's take a look at these lines if we can. So let's go ahead and take a look. We've got this guy. Who are you? You are a bus. I want to see what number you are. You are on bus line number 22. So if I go look at bus line 22, this is where you really see the strength of this mod. So if I scroll all the way down to you, there we go. So that's this guy. There we go. So that one currently has, it looks like 4 buses on it, and it's got just 2 points of interest. That's it. So what you can do here is I can actually decide to say, well, right now my entire fleet has this Man's Lion City, but you know what? This is more of a school bus route than anything else. So then I can go ahead and decide to switch everything to a school bus if I want, or to a biofuel bus, or just the regular bus. And so that's actually something really powerful, because you can set it for master, or using this set specific config on this line, you can set it for the individual lines. That is a very powerful tool. Now after you go ahead and switch up, so if I want this to be a special config, we'll go ahead and just switch it to a regular bus for the argument of this video. And if we want to go ahead and do the mass switch, you can go ahead and just remove all buses that are not matching that model. And then what we'll see is that this bus over here now, that's rolling out, this is now part of that line. And it is going to be running along that route. And that is actually pretty cool. And then obviously we're going to go ahead and switch that back, because I do happen to know that that bus line needs to have a bit more capacity than the normal buses provide. So let's go ahead and go back to specific config for the line. There we go. So now we're working with the mass amount again. Now, you can also go over to things such as ticketing, and you can actually decide what you want your different ticket prices to be. You can decide, okay, well, starting hour 1, or starting hour whatever, it's a 24-hour clock here. So you can say it starts at one price, ends up another, and this actually can get very powerful. You can start saying, okay, so starting at hour 0, it's going to be $1.50. We can go to hour 5, and then we can say, you know what, or actually hour 7. And you know what, this is going to be rush hour. This would actually work very well with the rush hour mod. You can sit there and double the price if you wanted, to try and maybe encourage people to take an earlier bus, which would be very interesting. And then, once your rush hour is over, you can go ahead and say, you know what, once it's a late rush hour, let's say once it's 10, it goes back down to 150. And so that is already a very powerful set of tools, and we are just getting started with what you can do with this mod. So, in a different panel, we've explored the asset selection, we've explored the ticket price. Now let's discuss the overall budget. This is where you can determine how many buses you have on the line. Now here again, you can do it hour by hour. You can have a few different options and say, okay, so starting at hour, we'll again work under a theoretical rush hour here. So you have 0 to 7, 7 to 10, and then 10 through the rest of the day. So if we go ahead and just say that it's a regular bus flow, but we need a little bit more bus happening at this time, so we can go ahead and say at this time it's going to be 180%, or we'll say 200%. We need double the capacity. at this time of day, just the amount of buses we have passing through. And you can actually sit there and watch all these buses sit there and pass through as they're trying to incorporate with rush hour and all that type of stuff. And if you ever need a reference of what time it is without having to look down at your panels down here or trying to look at a different menu, it is included on that clock. That clock is updated in real time in my experience. Now, of course, you can also just come over here and you can say delete the full list. And there we go. So this is just going to operate at regular numbers with no additions or subtractions. Now the next window over, the finance report, this is kind of where you can see, now this part is a little bit wonky at this point. It doesn't seem to be fully accurate, so this part I wouldn't take to heart too much, but this can at least give you a little bit of an idea of how much money you're wasting, because like right here I happen to know that that is for some reason counting the actual terminal that I'm using up here as part of the expense, and I don't quite know why it's doing that, but that is the thing that it is doing. So, you know what, we're just going to figure out what that's about at some point down the line, I'm sure. But in general, you can kind of see, okay, well, it loses a little bit of money typically, but right here, it's a bit more expensive because, you know, we're throwing buses on and off the lines, and we're adding buses that aren't needed, etc. So it's going to be a little bit wonky while we're going through that. And then over here, you can see General on the far left of this tab set, and this is just your standard interface that you're used to seeing a little bit of. You can see your weekly passengers, all this stuff, car trips saved, etc. It's a little bit messed up because I got rid of their buses for a minute there. And then it also shows you where their starting point is. This is actually something that's quite powerful because you can say, hey, this is the, so like, let's say for instance, I happen to know that most of the passengers in the morning start over here. So if I had a big change up in the morning where I'm having those extra buses come on, I want those extra buses to start over here where you have the smaller station. And then they're going to start over there and then end up over there. And then that way they get to the first stop on the line even faster. That is a very powerful tool. And now, of course, you can do your typical stuff. You can do line colors, you can mess with that, but you can also set it up to do automatic line colorings. So I can go down here and redefine the line color using palette settings. And that is a really cool option. And right now it's actually already matching my palette, so it's not going to mess with anything. So then the final thing over here, prefix. This is something that you can use for if you want to give it your own prefix. Like if I want to call this the dirt bus. So this is going to, every bus that is along that line is going to go ahead and be called, you know, dirt bus 11, or sorry, dirt bus 22. And that's what it's going to be called for this whole route. And that's kind of good for telling yourself, this is for this part, I'm going to say this is for this part, this is an express line, etc. And for me, what I typically do with stuff like this is I will actually mark things as express or local if I have two buses that run through an area. And that's also useful for things like trains. Now, moving on, you can also switch your icon out. You can say, okay, well, I want this one to be, you know, mountain, because it goes up to a mountain. So now if I go ahead to Lines Overview, you can look at what I have for buses. Check it out, they're all mountains. Pretty cool. Or you can also, if I go ahead and close that, go ahead and switch it to, let's go ahead and switch the general icon back to, I think it's the pentagon or default, and then we'll go to a specific config for this line. And you'll note that you can't sit there and give it its own unique context for the line using only that interface, so you can't give it its own icon or palette. And that is intentional so that you don't sit there and have confusing line data. However, everything else can be altered for specific lines. That's very important to note. So, if we go ahead over to here now, the right side of the interface, this is where you see a lot more powerful stuff. And just for fun, we're going to switch over to one of my train lines. In fact, let's go ahead and select this. Let's go ahead and pause this, grab this guy, there we go. So line details, there we go. So this is the My Summer Car is Good. This was named by one of my subscribers over on Twitch. So if I'm observing this, you can see all the different stops. That's interesting. Or you can show it unscaled, which it doesn't affect too much whenever it's this kind of station. However, if I go ahead and go to connections, aha! So now you can see that at this station, it intersects with 3 bus lines. Those are the 3 buses that use here, because it detects that's within range. Interesting. So let's go with the Green City Memorial Station. And I happen to note there are a couple of bus lines that terminate right here. And what do you know? We've got 2, 7, and 8 that would terminate right there. You can actually see exactly where it is, and you can click over to it. So I think that's pretty darn cool if you ask me. However, we still aren't done with this bag of tricks. You can come on over here now and say, okay, it's going to intersect with number 2 line. If I go ahead and select where that is, my bad, let's go ahead and just scale that. Makes it a lot easier. So you can go ahead to this station over here where it intersects with the brown line 1 with this turquoise line. So that's pretty darn cool. So you can sit there and hop around pretty easily and figure out where things go. So now that we're on the turquoise line, we can actually go to the modern central station, which is the hub of it, and we can actually see where everything's at. And the best part is we can actually rename what the stop is, and it will intelligently name itself. So if I go to one of these and I sit here and say I want this to be renamed from within the interface, I can do that. I can just say this is called Grand Central Station. There we go. And check that out. It's called Newbie Central right now, but this is also a multi-platform. I find the multi-platforms actually don't conform to the new names that you give. Ah, there it is. So it does conform to it on the line that you give it. There we go. So this happens to be the line that it will come in on, but it doesn't do that for realize. So if you have one of these multi-platform stations, you do have to be careful with that, so you don't sit there and have your dreams crushed like I just did. Alright, so let's go ahead and hop back in, and let's see what other data we can gather. Let's go ahead and just grab that train line again. That's a good train line to work with, because I know it's actually pretty actively used. So, this is the Stu Energy Express, and let's say I am curious about traffic flow on it, because I've looked at the connections, I've looked at all that stuff, so you can actually sit here and look at passengers waiting. And check this out. So if I go ahead and put this in, you can actually see the amount of people currently waiting, and more important, you can see this number down here, time until board. That is very interesting because basically your Sims will wait at a station, at any transit station, for a set amount of time. And once they get bored, after that timer hits 0, then they will begin to leave. And that is until the first wave gets bored and leaves, and then the second wave, third wave, etc. And so basically it's a balancing act. You've got to make sure that you have enough to get people where they need to go without putting too many vehicles on. And you need to make sure that none of these numbers tick down to 0. Because if one of those ticks down to 0, it is game over for you. Now, you can also use this for a lot of other cool stuff that we haven't even touched yet. You can actually look at your profit per station. That is really, really cool. So you can sit there and say, wow, so these are profitable stations, this one's not too profitable, etc. And then you can also look at the last 24 hours. So if you made any radical changes, or like if you had a big game or something, this is how you'd figure out what kind of profits you're potentially making off of your train system in my case. However, we still aren't done with all the cool things you can do with this mod. So if I go ahead and X out of that, and if I go to my options menu, this is kind of the finishing touch of what really convinced me on this mod being an amazing thing. Scroll through my mods list, so I'm going to go to Transport Lines Manager, and then I'm going to hit this button here, Draw City Map. So I'm going to click that, and then I'm going to go over to my files. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and open the Generate Map folder. Conveniently, they include a button there for you. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull this up on my desktop view. There we go. Oh, got a transition there. We don't need that. Go away. So if I go ahead and open this up, and then we see here, where is the exact file? So last modified, this one. Here we go. And now I can go ahead and it pulled up this beautiful transportation map for me, for my city. This is actually a very accurate transit map. So right where we're at Modern Central Station, you can see most of my transit in the city winds up there at some point or another. And you can also see other details, such as if I loop out here, you can see that transfer point between the green line and the brown line for the trains. I can see over here we've got the non-stop bus terminal that we started at today. You can also see all these buses. And what's interesting is that these different lines actually correlate to the density of the transit that they are. So you'll notice that my heavy rail is the darkest, followed by metro and tram being, or I'd say metro then tram, because you can see the tram line is a little thinner than these metro lines. And then the thinnest ones are the buses. And that seems to be the same case whether you use a small bus or a large bus, so that's just something to keep in mind. And then the neat thing is you can look at any of these stations and you can see what lines loop into there. And this is actually really good, especially if you do a hub and spoke model of transit. Anyways, so that is the Transport Lines Manager version 13 from Klythe over on the Steam Workshop. I've included a link in the description down below. And if you enjoy this kind of content, be sure to hit subscribe, be sure to like the video, be sure to let me know what you think down in the comments. And of course, come check me out on Twitch sometime. I stream there 5 days a week, including a 6th with the Cities in a Snap competition on Saturdays. Anyways, folks, this is Kazjum signing out. See ya!